So hi everybody, this is Amber again with another Goonie video. And in this video, I just kind of wanted to, I hope to dispel some of the myths that you might have about a typical English class by breaking down what we mean when we talk about the word language. Language, I believe, is the bedrock of not only communicating, but also of reading and writing. The language we learn as a child shapes everything we do. It's really just that important. So a discussion of how we use it is incredibly important to kick off an English class, especially because how we think about how we use language shapes the choices we make in terms of reading and writing. So what I wanted you to do for just a few seconds in your own mind is think for a few moments about what you think about when you hear the word language. What connotations, definitions pop into your head when you summon up that word in your mind? I obviously realize that we all have different conceptualizations of what the word means, which is absolutely fine. But for this class, I bet we could probably understand that a language is pretty much a system of coded sounds we've learned over time to communicate the thoughts in our head. But now I'm going to clarify the difference between the concept and the idea of a dialect. The concept of a language and the idea of a dialect. A dialect is the way in which we speak a language. Sometimes we call dialects accents, or the way our voice sounds when we speak a language. But dialects also shape which words we choose when referring to concepts in the world. For example, in this slide, you see that depending on where you grew up, you might refer to soft drinks as pop. Here in Nebraska, we do that, or you guys do that. I moved here from a different state, and I thought it was super weird when I got here when I was 13. But if you're from like the South, particularly where my mother is from in Louisiana, you notice that most people down there refer to all soft drinks as Coke. Even if you're going to order a Sprite, the generic word for soft drinks is still Coke, which is actually kind of interesting. Look at how messed up my slide is. Just go with me on this one. I'm sorry about that. So one of my questions was when I started teaching composition was, why do we do this? We actually find in research that we have some basic genetic instincts to learn both a native language and a native dialect. Even from the womb, babies are hardwired to be listening to the tones of their mothers to form the base of the language they will learn. And the unfortunate thing is, as we age, our natural propensity for learning more than one language drops. And we notice a significant drop after the age of 7, you notice here, and yet another very depressing drop right after the age of puberty. So by the time we actually start learning language, say in high school, our brains no longer really have, we can still learn a language, but it's much harder to learn a language than when, say, we were 6 months old. So, we also know that whatever language we learn from birth probably has an active impact on the culture that surrounds us. A very relevant, timely example of this comes from the use of gendered pronouns. We can think about that, and traditionally in the English language, there were no pronouns for someone who identified as a gender outside of the traditional gender binary of man versus woman. This, of course, we now know can make people who are gender fluid or non-binary feel limited in their identity expression. Luckily, though, we also know that culture shapes language, sometimes even forcing it forward where it needs to go. Language is always evolving, especially the English language, because it's the one predominantly used around the world. We can understand that our communication, especially with social media and the influx of technology, has seen an inundation of new words and phrases. But we also see language shifting due to societal expectation. So now we have new pronouns that have emerged for people who identify as gender fluid or non-binary. Zero is a good example of a pronoun that helps encapsulate that. So, and I've got a few other examples here on the screen. But all of these words have only existed within the last, say, 5 to 10 years or so, because culture has kind of forced that language forward. So, if language is fluid, if it's constantly changing and evolving, how do we really know what good grammar is? Like, what does that even mean? I want to know, do you cringe when you hear it like I'm inclined to do? Because I was given the same kind of red pen markings on my papers when I was, in the 5th grade to the 12th grade. And so for you, I want to kind of break down what this phrase means and get at the heart of why maybe you hated English classes and grammar in particular, because I know I did. And even if you're the opposite, you love grammar, you may want to hear what I have to say next. When your English teachers in high school or college urged you to use this phrase or use this stuff, good grammar, they were actually, in fact, urging you to adhere to a different dialect or way of speaking the English language that was not your native dialect. This dialect is actually called American Standard English and is the most commonly used dialect among academics and professionals. Funny thing is, nobody is born or raised learning to speak American Standard English as their native dialect. In a way, it's sort of made up. Over time, certain people agreed that this way of speaking was the best or most appropriate way, air quotes. But who made those decisions is a question you want to ask yourself, and why? We find that often American Standard English takes most of its characteristics from Northeastern American, well-to-do white culture. Basically, those in power over the last few centuries got to decide that their native dialects were the so-called best, and we still see the residual effect of that privileged position today when we ask our students to adhere to this dialect or that good grammar you so hate. That I hate too. However, we learned that language is more complicated than that. It would be boring if you simply stuck to American Standard English and used that as your main dialect all the time, even if it wasn't your native dialect. In fact, you may not know this, but you actually switch between several different dialects on a daily basis. And we call this code switching, depending on who you're with and what you're doing. You're much more inclined to use a more relaxed language or dialect closer to your native with friends and with peers. And while American Standard English has a rather sordid past considering its history, we still have to recognize that using it correctly can act as sort of a currency of sorts, just like the way your native dialect may act as a currency among your group of friends. In the right context, when you're writing like business emails and academic papers and stodgy things like that, it's like American Standard English is likely to help you succeed. That's why your teachers taught it to you. It's important to remember that it's no more important than any other dialect that you speak, and it has its own purpose, say in the business world, just like your native dialect has a purpose, say in your circle of friends. So this is kind of what I wanted to share with you today in this video, just as a reminder that when we talk about good grammar and we talk about a well-written paper, we're only talking about it within the context of a certain purpose of writing in college or writing in your field, depending on what kind of job you get. So it doesn't necessarily have any other power of you than that. So remember that going forward as we try to write these papers. If you have any questions over this, or you want to learn more, or you're confused, or if I spoke too quickly in this video, feel free to email me at the address provided, or feel free to come and see me on Thursdays from 9 until 1 in Arts and Science Hall 189A. Also, you feel free to set up an appointment with me at any point during the semester. I'm happy to meet you wherever, whenever, as long as I have some advance notice. All right, guys. Hope you have a good evening or afternoon or morning or whenever you're looking at this video, and I'll see you later.